Okay, so let's go back to our Voronoi thing here, and let's refine it a little bit. So our main weapon here, of course, is the points, where the points are, and how many there are. The more points, once again, we add, the more pieces that we'll have. So let's say we have 24 points. Looks like that. Now we have an even fog. Oops. Our fog here is uniformly distributed, and so our points are pretty uniformly distributed. So our pieces are, you guessed it, pretty uniformly distributed. It's true, we get a few little small pieces at the edges, but that's just because they're the edges of the thing. It's still pretty uniform towards the center. So what we can do, the points, the scatter itself, for example, only distributes points evenly where the density is even. So for example, we could make a volume VOP, and I usually like to use wrangles and things, and I would suggest the same, but when it comes to using the noise stuff, it's just so much easier to use these because there's just so many parameters on them already. So what we're going to do in here is we're going to say, hey, take the density that it already is, because that's what is the whiteness in the volume. It's how much density there is. And if you've watched my dynamics volumes, you definitely know that by now. Dynamics volume lessons, that is. So we have density. We've got output density. Well, we want to change that. Let's say, how about, depending on where we are in space, where each voxel is, because remember, this little VOP thing is going to run over every single voxel in here. Let's query a three-dimensional noise. That's going to be like some swirly marble pattern. And then let's multiply the density as it was by some weird pattern, and then we'll output that. And furthermore, to make sure that we aren't going to get negative numbers, I'm going to say, give me whatever number is bigger, either the number that we just got out of the noise or 0. So there we go. So now we're sure that we've clamped the bottom of the range. So going back to this, so we can see we have a lot less of this now. I'm going to say make the amplitude bigger and maybe make the frequency like that. So you can kind of see this pattern now in here. That's kind of cool. The attenuation will help keep space between the little clouds, the little blobs of things. And actually, I think I'm going to go back the other way. I'm going to make the frequency smaller. That way, we have bigger blobs in certain areas and big gaps. So see how we have this huge empty spot here now? And we have density over here. So now when I scatter into that, the points, as you can see, are only there. When we had this off, they were everywhere. So this is where it was. They're everywhere. When I did this, the volume went to that side, and now the points are on that side. And that's true no matter how many points I add. It'll always keep them, it's going to roughly approximate that setup. Now we still are getting a couple over here, but by and large, they're mostly going to this side. Cool. So I'm just going to say, hey, I want 50 points. I think that's good. So there's 50 points. You can see that the smaller pieces are on this side and the bigger pieces are on this side now. So now now it's at least a little bit more interesting. So going back to our simulation here, drop it, bam. So now we've got some bigger pieces and some smaller pieces. Let's actually try to get that a little more extreme. I'm going to come back here. Some of these areas over here look like they don't have density, but they probably have very low density values. So I'm going to say, I'm going to make a ramp. Let's see, ramp parameter. And let's put that, we'll put that ramp parameter here after our thing. And we don't want color, we want this to be a spline ramp. So basically this is going to take a 0 to 1 input and then output a 0 to 1 output. But the 0 to 1, the mapping will be based on our ramp here. So I'm going to say, hey, if you're a low number, then you are a really low number. And if you're a high number, well, then you really deserve to be a high number. So looking at our scatter again, you can see how it, wrong one. You can see how it affects it. So the points are starting to leach over there, or just to put the extreme number up again. Here's 5,000 points. As I start to move this over, you can see it's kind of squelching this area here. It's saying, hey, if you were 0.5 or less, because this is the input along the bottom, and the output is along the top. There we go. We're saying anybody that was 0.5 along the x-axis here, it now is 0. If you were 0.1, you're 0. If you're 0.3, you're 0. If you're 0.6.5, you're right around where you were. And by the time you get to 0.8, you're now 1. So it's just a remap curve to really drive all these points into those areas there. So we probably don't need 5,000, but if we had like 500 and we looked at this, you'll see, look, now we have lots of small pieces on this side and really big pieces on this side. So now you can really see it better. I still probably only want 100 because I'm thinking ahead. I want to drop like 100 of these guys on the ground later. Maybe, I don't know, maybe even 1,000 of them. We'll see how crazy I'm feeling when I'm done with this. But anyway, for now, there you have it. We can by controlling the points and where they are, you can control, like, let's say if we had a shot, like for a specific shot in a movie, and I knew this pig's gonna fall on the ground on his snout, I would just cluster a bunch of points here because I knew that's where he's gonna hit the ground. So I might as well put all the little high detail areas where it's gonna be useful in the first place. Cool. So now the other thing we can do is if we have a lot of pieces, we can do something called clustering. Clustering basically says, instead of making a separate unique point for a separate unique piece rather, for every one of these points, it'll take points that are near each other and say, you both together make one point. So Voronoi will still do the same algorithm that it always does, where it makes an individual piece for each point. But then once it's done, it'll say, oh, were these 2 points the same cluster ID? Well, then fuse them together, and it'll make one super piece that's more interesting. Now, of course, it won't be convex anymore because it'll have this, cutaway thing on 2 sides. But it will at least be a more interesting piece. The bullet will end up making its own, it'll still make a convex hull around it, but let's say if this became a cluster, this yellow and green one, and this purple and brown one became a cluster, well, his convex hull is going to come around this way, and his convex hull is going to intersect it going this way. Now, Bullet can handle that, but it is better if you can keep it away from that. It'll handle it to a certain degree, but it can make collisions go through each other and some other garbage stuff. So here we go. So here is their default clustering. It basically took the points that we gave it, used a noise actually not to move any pieces around, but to say, hey, what pieces fall in this region of the noise? What pieces fall in this region? And this is what it came up with. You can see as I change the noise size, there'll be less and less clustering. And as I make the size bigger, more and more will fall into the same clustered piece. So actually the default looked pretty okay here. Let's just say that's fine, and let's see what that gets us with our simulation. So here's our new thing. You can see how we have these, and you can kind of see where the original pieces were too. We can still see the lines there. But now we have pieces that are not just boring, obvious Voronoi. So it did a pretty good job. In fact, let's just keep this camera closer from now on. And maybe a little bit closer. Bye-bye. Cool. So there you have it. Falls, crashes. As far as I can see, it looks okay. But I know from experience that by having these clustered volumes, these things sticking through each other, these convex shapes, you'll get collision errors. In fact, I can see one now. See this green and pink here? Notice that they are interpenetrating each other. It's really bad right here. So you can see the green is going completely through the pink, which looks really bad if it's noticeable. Many times it's not noticeable. If you're going to do a full-fledged shot, you're probably going to cover it with little pieces of debris. There's going to be motion blur, maybe the camera's moving. There'll definitely be smoke coming out of there. So many times it doesn't matter. And you can get away with this because it's still fast. The pieces still look pretty good. And as long as people aren't getting too close, you'll never see it. And you can see it frees itself eventually. And it will never be allowed to go back in once it frees itself. But meanwhile, while it hasn't freed itself, you can see that. So, what can we do? Well, allow me to belabor the point first, which I know you love, and show you how the reason why it's happening is, again, these convex hulls are all intersecting each other now. And you can kind of see it happening here. There, you can kind of see it. See how these lines kind of disappear into it? That's because they're self-penetrating. You can definitely see it here. Wish there was a better way to show you this. I wish these were all different colors. But anyway, that's what's up. They're all, maybe this would be a good one. You can definitely see it now, the way the blue is coming through and is on the inside of the red here. So I don't like that. So what I like to do is we're going to use constraints now.